One of the delightful characteristics of Kiwi-ness is that we're really, really bad at social distancing. So the next little skill set is a seemingly incredibly simple meditative exploration. And it's a bit of a process, so I'm going to walk you through it. And my hope is that we'll, particularly if the decision is made that we won't be gathering for the last two parts of this series, I would like to see some things get posted online, like the exercise video, if you need a laugh. But just to be reminded of the principles of those lung awareness enhancers, and maybe also of this little meditative process. And I don't know how far away the Dharma Sphere website. It will? But is that website actually live yet?
Starting today.
All right. You know, this is very reassuring because, like, the Dharma Sphere has no independent, inherent self-existence whatsoever. Please don't confuse it with an organization or an institution of some kind. It's kind of a wild, unruly collective of wonderful people, which includes me. But it's not limited to me, thankfully, for everyone involved. So guess how this begins? Let's see who's really on it. How does this start? Oh, oh, my God. And not just going yada, 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 it's the feeling the ground part, but really settling into all the food I've ever eaten has come from here. Every time I've tripped and fallen down, there's been a place to land. All the material in my clothing, my dwellings, have been unconditionally gifted to me by the earth through the agency of an unconscionable number of middlemen and women. But the earth asks nothing. It supports, nurtures unconditionally. And we feel that if we allow ourselves to notice it. And when we do that, something inside us just kind of goes, ah, and just lets go a tiny little bit. Oh, as you feel this support, recognizing that we don't live on the earth. We are an aspect of the consciousness of our world. We are from the earth. We are of the earth. You could say we are a manifestation of the consciousness of this world that can move freely and interact with other life forms. And we are capable of self-reflection. And we are the only aspect of the consciousness of Earth that we know are capable of self-reflection. So you might say we are the self-reflection capacity of the Earth to know itself. And as we hold these two notions about unconditional nurture and support and the role that human beings have in that self-reflection piece, just allow your consciousness to move up your spine, vertebrae by vertebrae. And as you do that, imagine the power of the evolutionary force of this planet that encouraged us to go from creatures who were just simply focused on where the next banana or termite mound was, to beings that have an upright posture. And what science tells us is that change from a primate way of doing things to an upright way of doing things was what began to change our brains so that we have this bicameral brain with two rooms, one of which is all about concept and linear thinking and language, and the other is about direct experience and the ability through the corpus callosum to have those two very different qualities of consciousness with different languages to intersect. And if they do not have harmony and balance between the two rooms in our mind, then our bodies will not be healthy, our social interactions will not be healthy, and our self-reflection on behalf of our world will not be healthy. And I think we are living in a time that gives great evidence of how unbalanced that relationship has become. And now we experience ourselves as supported beings of this world, and our bodies are upright and, a bit more like a willow tree than an oak tree. They're free to move and respond to causes and conditions. We're not just solid, unmoving. Not that oak, I feel very badly. I feel like I'm really being disrespectful to oak trees. Of course they move. They just do it really slowly when we're not watching. And now in this supported, upright, self-reflected condition, be aware of the fact that whether you look through the lens of mysticism or the lens of science, that there is a great deal of clear, empty space. and just open your mind to the vastness of space outside, as far as the mind is capable of going. Think universes, but also inside, what we experience as solid or fluid. If we go down through the tissue and the organs to the world of molecules and the atoms that compose them, if we allow ourselves to imagine the subatomic realm where there is simply vast, empty space with a few idiosyncratically moving particles bouncing around in it. And what the folks with the microscopes and telescopes suggest to us from their discoveries is that the ratio between space and particles is exactly the same if we look outward or inward. Form and emptiness, emptiness and form in a continual dynamic dance that doesn't stop at the surface of our bodies, doesn't stop at the interface between our feet and the earth. And if we open our conscious awareness to this unconditional nurture and support, the uprightness that characterizes our humanness, and then the vast space in which all of this is taking place, we are in absolutely the best place to do very profound quality spiritual work. And whatever practice you like to do, if you start like this, it will be enhanced because it places us in reality. This is not a fantasy. This is a real series of openings to what is. Ground, uprightness, and space in every direction that the mind investigates. And now please spend a little bit of time focusing on the doorways of your physical senses. For those of you who've been doing the peace meditation for these many months with us, both inside and in the park, you'll have a good method for that. But for those who are new to this idea, just really allow your awareness to rest in your eyes. It's actually a good idea to open them, even though you're not looking at anything. Just let your eyes be open and receptive to light, to shapes, to colors. Just see if that apparatus of seeing can operate quite passively, not looking at something and making an object out of it, but with awareness that the visual world will just simply flood in through that doorway if we're open and receptive to it. And then repeat this experiment with the whole physical apparatus of your ears. Again, just allowing them to be open and receptive to sound and to silence. And be aware that the whole of your body is a receptor for sound also. Every cell is vibrated by the ambient sounds just of the shape of the room, the traffic, the internal workings of your body, your breath. Vibration is constant. Because we're sitting upright but still free to move, you might even find that the body just kind of shimmers a little physically as that vibration is felt. And then bring this experiment into the whole of your smelling apparatus, the nostrils and the interior structure of the nose, and the scent receptors that live just behind the bridge of your nose. And this is, in some ways, from an evolutionary point of view, the most primal of our sensory experiences. You may think you're not smelling anything, but just stay with it a little bit longer, because there is a scent atmosphere in here. And it is our sense of smell that, for most people, it's subliminal, but you can develop this quite highly, right? Our sense of smell is our first awareness field that tells us whether we're actually safe or not. The nerve from the scent receptors goes directly back to the reptilian part of our brains, the most ancient instinctual brain that we receive from our primate ancestors. In our society, because we're so bombarded by chemical smells of one kind and another and perfumes and so on, we're losing that subtlety maybe that allows us to notice pheromonal activity or to feel situations that are not actually safe in real time. And that makes us much more vulnerable to fantasy fears about things that haven't actually happened yet, or things that happened in our past. And exploring the openness of our taste receptors is next. Even though you're not drinking coffee or eating muffins, there is a chemistry in your mouth. And what's that like as a baseline? The direct chemistry that we experience in our mouth, if we keep checking into this, we find that there's a sort of default chemistry that is how we taste to ourselves when we're not using our taste buds to record substances. And we can tell a tremendous amount about the chemical balance and health of our organism by being aware of that default taste. It's a little hard to do right now because, there's just been a tea break and snacks and so on. But notice first thing in the morning when you wake up. And now notice and invite this openness to receive the messages from all the tactile receptors in your body. Very specialized nerves for temperature, for movement, for pressure. Science actually tells us there's a total of 7 very specialized nerve types for different kinds of tactile experiences. And because what we call the surface of our body, our skin, actually goes inside, doesn't it? It doesn't suddenly stop at the orifices. So there's tactile awareness possible inside the body also if we're training ourselves to be aware of that possibility, and we can settle down. And noticing those interior tactile experiences might actually have a beneficial role to play in noticing when things are out of balance in our body chemistry, when things are not in a dynamic equilibrium inside our body, when there's stuckness or challenge of some kind that might be a harbinger of disease if we're simply noticing it. And when we practice in this way, we don't shut our senses down. We invite them to be as open and receptive to the whole of our experience in this moment as we can be. Supported, upright, spacious, and with all the doorways through which we perceive data from our world without and our world within, wide open, gentle, and receptive. And if our senses are open and receptive like this, we're very aware of the outer environment that we're in, aren't we? And if we allow ourselves to have that awareness of the outer environment and awareness of our inner environment, we might notice that there isn't a spot, a big black line like on a map of the world that delineates one country from another. That there's absolutely no difference between the quality of our sensing externally and the quality of our experience internally. There's no border that says, you are now entering the zone of Bob or Doris. It's just a continuing awareness of what we call seeing and hearing and tasting and touching and smelling and cognition. We might also notice that we're breathing, that there's this dynamic exchange as we breathe in the universe and we breathe out the universe. And I'm not going to tell you any icky stories about, breathing in one another, because that'll freak somebody out maybe, but that really, if we take on this whole notion of the interconnectedness of all phenomena, that in this most basic way we are exchanging data with everyone else. And if we pause to remember that what we call our bodies is actually an absolutely diverse community of single-celled organisms who don't have any concept about Bob or Doris or you. They're just in there eating and pooping and having sex and building colonies and, taking care of the dead. Like the dead parts of us, thank goodness they do a job. We begin to have an incredible appreciation for this environment that we are, this community that we are. I like to tell the story of the Demodex mites that are tiny microscopic creatures that live in your tear wells around your eyes. And if you look at them through a microscope, they look like little female rhinoceroses. And they only come out at night. And they trudge around on your face, gobbling up dead cells and whatever goo you put on to make yourself pretty. And they have little bristly things that they use to clean out pores. I should have brought pictures. They're so cool. And sometimes it's kind of a creepy thought, how will I ever be able to sleep because I know they're going to come out? But our bodies are able to do absolutely everything they do because this incredible colony of creatures that don't have human DNA, they're their own evolutionary selves, are doing all of these amazing jobs of digesting our food and taking care of the waste products. So what is it we think we are, and where do we stop, and where does everything else start? And now just allow yourself to rest the mind on the flow of breath, right? And you begin to see that, maybe we're not breathing out. Maybe the world around us is breathing in, and that just is a kind of diaphragm that causes us to breathe out. And maybe we're being breathed. Could we just relax and lighten our load of responsibility? We don't actually have to do this. It just happens. And it happens because all the green plants and all the phytoplankton in the oceans are creating a chemical we call oxygen that we depend on. And our waste product of carbon dioxide is what feeds them. Where can we say the world of green plants stops and we begin? Can we just rest and be universe breathing? If you notice you're not breathing, then be grateful to all the little microorganisms that are starting to take care of the waste product. We might also notice, although this is a bit of an artificial situation, isn't it? But if you're doing this on your own and your senses are alert and open and receptive, that you might start noticing that experiences that you consider are out there, like the sound of the traffic, are all actually happening in here. We only conceptually make up a story that they're happening out there. Really, from the point of view of direct experience, they're only happening in here. And we notice that we respond in some way with the other part of our brains, don't we? We go, I like that smell, or I don't like that sound, or that color reminds me of my Aunt Agnes. She was so kind to me. That every single one of our sensory feeds or data gathering has an internal response that takes place. And so we can allow our awareness of the breathing to help us to dissolve that sense of what's out there and what's in here, what's mine and what's other. And just allow those boundaries to soften a little. And the more we engage with this, we find ourselves in the most wonderful place. It's the most powerful, most magical place ever. And you don't have to cook it up. You can't fantasize it. That place is called right here and right now. And it's constantly changing. breathing in and breathing out. The organism adapting, the mind adapting, responding. And I don't want to give you ideas that shape your experience, but invite you to notice that this experience of being just here, just now, just fully present and engaged is actually quite pleasant. If things are experienced by us as pleasant, we often do that mouth yoga thing without even thinking about it. And if not an actual physical smile, there might be an internal sense of warmth and harmony and wholeness that comes from just doing this simple thing. And we could notice that there's a quality of appreciating that ability to just simply rest and be just as we are, not trying to change anything, not trying to shape our experience or label it or evaluate it, just simply being living, breathing manifestations of earth. This is the most powerful state that a human being can be in. And it's often accompanied by a really open-hearted feeling of, I'm aware that the quality of what I'm giving in this moment to others, to the world, is as full and complete, is as wise and kind as it's capable of being at this exact moment in time. I am an organism that is receiving. I am an organism that is giving. No separation, simultaneous, automatic. And if we learn through our experience to really trust this feeling, then we simply offer ourselves with no condition, with no agenda, with no subtext. We offer ourselves to the world. We offer ourselves to the universe. And then when you feel ready or maybe even willing to let this go, just pay attention really carefully to where you think you have to be if you let it go. Is it really necessary to reconstruct all those senses of I and other, of us and them? And if that sense starts to reemerge, you just give it a little pat and welcome it to the party, because our egos are part of the evolution of consciousness too. It's just, they're so, they're the last part of evolution to show up, so they're the babies of the family. No wonder they're so incredibly insecure. No wonder they need so much reinforcement. And here we are. I don't really want to stop, but I think it would be a good thing not to stop, but simply to segue, right? Can we keep that awareness alive? And then if the part of your brain that is uh, full of concepts and ideas might actually be generating some questions, then this would be a good time to ask them, because we don't know if we'll have another opportunity. And that's always been true. But I'm well aware of my agedness and vulnerability, and the agedness and vulnerability of many of our precious ones, which includes um, the vulnerability of all of us, really. So, is there anything you'd like to know? Go, dive in. And please, people, speak up, because it's hard for me to hear with the mics in my ears, and it might be hard for people to hear on the other side of the room.
It's a strange question, I feel, because like when you were doing the meditation, so it was all for me. It was all nice and lovely, but then when you said about the sound not coming from out there, it's all in here, I get fear. I get fear around a lot of these type of meditations when it starts.
Oh.
Being a bit different from what I expect it to be.
Mm.
Like when you talk about no boundaries.
Yeah.
And so when that fear arises,
Well,
and the chatter comes. Oh, and also I noticed the chatter comes like we were talking about earlier today. The chatter starts.
Well, it's a very natural response, isn't it? I mean, we have to understand that we've lost that really primal conditioning where fear is something that drives us to state safety, right? If there's an actual tiger coming after. I actually feel New Zealanders have a terrible deficit in this regard, because no predator animals. It's really cool to live somewhere where there are actually things that will eat you, and it isn't personal, right? you know. Hmm? Well, we have sharks, but not many people interact with them. And actually, interacting with sharks I've done a fair bit of, and it's quite a wonderful experience, actually. So, so we need to see that we have fear responses. And then within this kind of process, right, if you're practicing on your own, you can hang out in any one of those principles. In a way, it's kind of holographic at the very start, and then each of the kind of developments cascades very naturally out of the one before. So if you discover that anxiety is arising, then what do? You go back to the ground, right? You focus on the ground. It's reliable. I mean, we're not talking about earthquakes. Lots of people go, oh no, ground isn't reliable, but hello, it's still there. It may change its form, but everything is changing its form. Mm-hmm. And we're all still eating, and, when we put our foot on the sidewalk or the footpath, it doesn't kind of suddenly go through and you don't end up in outer space. So recognizing that that support is not arguable, right? It's really, really, really there. It's there for everybody. It's been there for the whole of your life. And I think lots of us have conditioning that makes us not feel safe. Because when we were little, I'll tell you, the best of parents is not capable of being there all the time. Right? It's really important to have compassion, for yourself and how you perceive that things happen that shaped you, and not look for blaming, but you have remedies, right? And so you stay with that feeling of support until that agitation drops away. And then you start really slowly and carefully working through the process again. Does that make sense to you? And really, you could stop at any point. You know, if if you notice that, if I'm opening up the sense of sight and there's no wobble, but I go to the sense of hearing and there is a wobble, then go back to sight. When it and if it's wobbling in the sight now, then go back till you find the ground again, and that ability to just settle. And depending on how long you sit for, you don't have to get anywhere with that practice. You can go exactly as far as is wholesome for you. And it's actually a big mistake to push through the gnarly bits, right? You simply notice that they're there, right? And sometimes just acknowledging that they're there, right? Feeling the support of the ground prevents them from going into the chitter-chatter place, because by then that's the Velcro hook thing, right? You're done, and so it takes some work to recede from that. But it's one of the beauties of the exercise is you can craft it in a very orderly way to meet whatever needs are arising in your own mind. Good. It's a really good question, and often we have a feeling of like, I have to do the whole thing, I have to start at the beginning, and I have to get to the end, and even though I really dislike a lot of it, even though it's really triggering me in different ways, you know. But honestly, if there isn't something in there for everybody, I'd be very, very surprised. Any other questions? Oh.
and meditative reflection. And sometimes, like now, there's a feeling of more action, more, I guess, trying to help, and yet the reflection and the meditative side is probably even more important than these kind of. So I guess it's that balance between those two.
Well, that's a really wonderful question. And again, it's important that we acknowledge the shaping that most of us have had, that doing is more important. And when there's something, um, so obviously unfortunate taking place, you know, people really want to roll up their sleeves and, get busy. And I'm not trying to suggest that that's a bad idea, but this is one of the really strong principles in Buddha Dharma. It is the principle that what we actually are sharing with others when we're doing some kind of an action, yeah, we may be handing out, working in the soup kitchen or handing out breathing masks or something. But it's the quality of our mind state that determines the power of that action. So the first responsibility, if we're going to be activists, is what's the quality of our activism? Are we activists because we're pissed off? Are we activists because we feel so fortunate and others are less fortunate, right? Are we activists for reasons that are ego enhancing rather than being genuinely an aspect of the planet that knows how to love and act fully and compassionately for the benefit of all beings, right? And sometimes we're activists because we're scared and it helps keep that at bay, right? So all I can really suggest is, before we do anything, we have a responsibility to see that the tone of mind in which we're doing it, mind and heart, is actually kind and loving and, because you know what? If it isn't, you'll get worn out. And you may not have the sense to notice that you're exhausted and take time to refuel. You may keep on doing good for others when you're actually so stressed that what you're sharing is the quality of your stressedness, your worry or fear. Now, please understand, His Holiness the Dalai Lama says this wonderful thing. He says, just do your best. And that isn't your best measured against what are the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas doing. It's not measured against, how wonderfully Lady Bountiful you were yesterday or 5 years ago. It's just simply the best that you're capable of today. And then we recognize that some days our best is to sit and work with any wholesome practice, this one we've just worked with, or really anything that floats your boat and helps to kind of erode those sense of there being barriers between you and the world, right? Sometimes that's the best thing we can do because then we recharge, we refuel, we reinforce the wholesomeness within ourselves. So that then when we go forth to do, right? We're doing it with that sense of spaciousness and openness, and our faces reflect that, our gestures reflect that. Does that make sense to you? You know, and the thing is again, it's like learning how to really feel that presence of the planet there all the time, because it is there all the time. If we practice all of these things when they're relatively easy, then they will become more and more automatic. They'll become a kind of default that just simply shows up. If we wait till we're already stressed or angry or, exhausted, then they can't just show up. We need to take care of ourselves, not because we're selfish, but because our whole organism is feeding into the whole all the time. It never stops. And so what's the quality of that sharing is all that I ask, right? Of the activists, of myself. Well, I'm guilty. I can be in bed with the iPad and there's like just one more email and like so-and-so's grandmother just died and I better say something, like there's no end to the suffering. Do we understand that from earlier, you know? Like the suffering is not going to suddenly cease. But are we going to reinforce our own suffering and then try to make the suffering of the world better? Doesn't that seem to you like logically really insulting behavior? It's like, I'm a wreck, but oh boy, I'm going to do good. Oh, I'm furious, but boy, I'm going to really get those motherfuckers. you know? Down with the politicians, down with the economic mega structures, like how actually is that going to make a difference that will move us in the direction of goodness? And really that's all we want. That's all human beings want, is to be well and happy, to be free. So maybe we could start by modeling that as best we can. And then whatever it is we share from that state will be beneficial, absolutely guaranteed. And this also includes, maybe some of you are genuine cave-dwelling meditators in your heart of hearts. All you want to do is practice expanding that force of that wholesome awareness field for the rest of your life. And you feel a little bit guilty because, oh my, I should be out there in the trenches. It's that healing the mori, the energy of the whole, is the job that mystics of all religions and all cultures have done as long as there have been humans. And there's a great shortage these days of people doing that. The traditional cultures that kind of took care of that are changing. And the parts of the world where those activities really were considered to be a very mature, responsible way to spend your life, are all under threat of some kind. So we can't judge those who choose to not be out there on the front lines. And maybe for all of us, the reality is we need to be a little bit of both, right? And making sure that we have that harmonious ability to plug into the depth right? To open to the vastness of the intelligence of the universe, and then manifest that in our doings. And then we start to see that there actually is no separation between those things at all. They all come from this boundless aspiration for the well-being of all that lives, which includes you. And then all the choices are good choices. Does that make sense? I have about 3 things on the list that we're not going to have time for, so I hope at some point when our world is a little healthier and we have an opportunity to come together to do some of those things. Because the teachings are ancient. They're universal. You see exactly the same principles show up if you look into any esoteric, which is a direct experience part. All the world religions have them. I'm so grateful to my teacher, Namgyal Rinpoche, because he insisted we investigate and practice all of them. So we didn't get all up ourselves about how special we were about one or the other. And of course, it's quite natural that we have affinities for things, right? We feel at home in different traditions, and that's a good thing. This incredible diversity of goodness is part of the evolutionary history of the consciousness of our world. We just can't allow those things to create us's and them's, better and worse. So, we're all on umpty-ump mailing lists these days, aren't we? So I got something earlier this week that the Clear Vision Project has sent out to the folks who are anchors of the sharing circles, and those of you who are in sharing circles will get a copy of it probably. But it's so beautiful. It so names a lot of the things we've been talking about. This principle of chaos, where a very small cause can have a really huge effect, and just a really lovely way of positioning ourselves as beings who aspire to wholeness, who aspire to know and to love as completely as it is possible for a human being to know and love. And that all living beings would be radiantly included in this. If we leave out even one evildoer, we've failed. It's all or it's not working. And this is from a group based in Portugal called Tamara. And you've probably never heard of them. I'd never heard of them before I heard of them either. But they're an interesting bunch. And so this is titled Learning from Corona. And I love the word corona because it's crown. And in the Vajrayana tradition, the crown is the paramount empowerment there is. So maybe this is a really lovely way of looking at the virus. What is possible through fear must also be possible through trust. Dear friends and partners all over the world, thanks to the coronavirus, we as humanity are currently learning something very precious. We're learning how powerful and efficient something incredibly tiny can be when it resonates with a latent field. This tiny thing, in this case, is a virus. And the latent field is fear, an immense collective fear of the future, an ingredient and counterpart of turbo-capitalism on the edge of global collapse. Things are happening today that no one else has been able to achieve, not the climate strikes or the environmental actions of the last 50 years or the UN in all the years of its existence, nor all the efforts, threats, appeals, movements, scientists, not the Pope or any other authorities. Now we're seeing determined, rigorous action across all continents. Industry, tourism, education, sports, large areas of public life in many countries of the world are taking a time out. Humanity is on pause, and suddenly the skies over China and northern Italy are blue again. They haven't been seen as blue for decades. I'm going to add that in Venice, people are able to see the bottoms of the canals for the first time in living memory. There are fish swimming in the canals and dolphins following them to feed, right? This hasn't happened in living memory. It happened so fast. Air pollution is decreasing dramatically. People stay at home and they finally have time to themselves to reflect and contemplate, to think about what is essential, to be with their children and the people close to them. In Italy, they're singing to each other from windows and balconies. Who or what could cause this? Who has so much power? We've heard conspiracy theories about the origin of the virus, but we deliberately don't deal with them here. If the new coronavirus was actually passed to humans from wildlife, we could see it as a measure of nature to help humanity to finally change our lives. Regardless of whether the virus is man-made or natural, it shows us how fragile and vulnerable our globalized systems are, and that humanity is capable of fundamentally changing its collective behavior, literally from one day to the next. Let's take the forced pause mode to imagine how a healing transformation in our societies could come about. How will we supply ourselves? Who are the ones around us that we can cooperate with? What will we do when the global system actually collapses. Perhaps later we will look back on the corona crisis as a great collective exercise in which we began to develop the decentralized community systems with which we could respond to the ecological and social crises of our time and place. Fear and panic aren't good advisors. The qualities we need most at this time of radical change are trust, mutual support, responsibility for the whole, flexibility and openness in the face of the unpredictable. Something remains startling. The incredible power of the virus and its ability to show humanity that we're much more intimately connected than we ever thought. When a substance in our airways, which is only transmitted through direct contact, spreads around the world in a few weeks, we can say we are indeed one breath. And that is good news. Why shouldn't we be able to use this intimate unity of life on Earth to start a positive movement? What is possible through fear must also be possible through trust. From mouth to mouth, something quite different than a virus might then be shared. Above all, there is a message of hope and certainty for the future, that we're part of a large community of people, animals, nature, and divine beings who form a unified whole, who support, help, perceive, complement, and love one another. The earth and humanity can be healed even at this stage and in a short time if we humans realize and accept our real task. Love and unity are the basic substance in the alliance of all living creatures. That is the good news. And what do we need to make this good news spread just as quickly as the virus? We need to resonate with another collective field within us, one that is much deeper than fear, a field that is still hidden at the present. It's the collective field of trust, the matrix of life. For despite all the suffering and the horrors of the past and all the threats of the present, life is still oriented towards joy, curiosity, and survival. There is a core within us that knows this, and it is called trust. As absurd as it may seem to many in the face of all of the precautions and restrictions, this is our common task now, to strengthen this field of trust through everything we do, think, communicate, and how we interact with one another. This is our work, to collectively shake off the trauma of fear and activate this deeper layer of trust. This could be the foundation of a new culture. Now, you may have all sorts of different responses to that, and that's a good thing. We're very diverse. But as we've been saying more than once over these few weeks we've been coming together, right? In order to explore the teachings of liberation in whatever form they show up for you, one of the first things that we need to do is suspend our disbelief. We don't have to believe. We have to investigate. We have to find out for ourselves. And so many traditions offer us roadmaps and methods, right? It's, just because here I'm kind of standing forth for Buddha Dharma because that's been what I've trained in for these many decades, right? But it's not the only way. Maybe we could stop arguing about things like that and get on with it, right? And respect and care for one another. And I hope that should it come to the point of New Zealand officially taking a social timeout, which seems like quite a wise move at this point, that, this collective called Dharmasphere that isn't really much of a thing at all, will be able to offer from all of the different skills that are involved in this collective, which actually includes anybody who wants to be included. Ways of navigating through this period of deep reflection that we will be provided with by this time out. And I really hope that in your mind you will think of this as a timeout and not as a lockdown. I can't even believe they're using that language. I don't want to have anything to do with a lockdown, but I'm all there for a timeout. And it's a really good example to me of, we've spoken about this first, about how our language frames a certain kind of response to things. And, like I would really welcome the opportunity to get sent to the corner. I wouldn't even mind the dunce cap. and then to meet with one another anew, when we've had an opportunity to heal ourselves a bit from the busyness of the vicissitudes of life. And I would ask most sincerely that we do this thing formally at the end of meditations and classes and so on, that we call the sharing of merit. And merit is another one of those really silly words that mostly means to other people something it was never intended to mean. In the ancient language, the word that is translated as merit is punya or prajna. And it's literally translated in two ways. One, it means power, and the other, it means wisdom, right? Wisdom and power are the same. Right? So we end our classes, and people who practice with us, we end our group sessions by saying through the power of this action, right? It also means through this powerful, wise action. Right? And I encourage you to remember that because interconnection every single thought, feeling, action is already shared. In essence, we do not have the power to share or the power to withhold, which is why all of that me first activity is so dumb. Mm-hmm. The sharing is instantaneous, simultaneous, immediate, which is why this whole thing of what kind of state of mind are you in while you're doing stuff really, really matters, right? And if any of us do anything that we think is wise and kind and happy making and whole meeting, like even cleaning a toilet for the benefit of all sentient beings is a powerful action. A joy-filled action. How we do the dishes, how we take care of all of our personal hygiene, right? How we do our shopping. All of these things share a quality into the matrix of the whole, right? And we can really up our game around that just by simply being present and aware of our state of mind. And when we do something that has powerful motivation, like freedom for all beings, then we might consciously share that, just to remind ourselves that even when we're in the privacy of our own little rooms, in our privacy of our own little minds, that what we do with our minds is powerful. It affects the whole. And we can dedicate that power to people who are suffering, individuals or areas of the planet. We can direct that power consciously to frontline healthcare workers, to policy makers, to, our police, who are kind of like the white cells of the organism of society, to all of those structures that we rely on collectively to keep us collectively well and happy. All the people who keep shelving in the grocery stores and watching people behave like greedy, right? These people are part of our community. And mostly they function invisibly for our benefit. People who take away the rubbish and clean the streets. All of these folk are not going to get a time out. So if it does come to that, may we please remember all of these aspects on which our well-being here in Nelson depends. Fair enough. So experiencing ourselves as this conscious aspect of our world through this powerful action, may all the distortions of body, speech, and mind be healed, and all beings firmly established on the path of liberation. Thank you all so much. I hope we meet again sometime.